Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the very flustered masturbator at the moment. With Lucky driving me crazy, and Dodo's been driving me crazy. So anyway, I put her in the cage. We're gonna hope she'll shut up for a little bit, and I don't have to put this on my head, which is what I was doing. And one of the time, this is the fourth or fifth time I've tried to film this ridiculous, pointless show. Anyway, this is what we call our vintage. It's a complicated title. Vintage SF Paperback Hodgepodge. Vintage SF Paperback Hodgepodge. You didn't even know you wanted these until I started making them, and then everyone wants them. It's like Pringles. No one wanted a Pringle before the Pringles were invented. I remember when the Pringles were invented. I never wanted one. Never asked to have a composite, weird, feels like packing material, and I would want to eat those, and they would all be exact same size. I never knew I wanted them. They came out. I bought them all the time. I still buy them. Vintage SF Paperback Hodgepodge is sort of the same idea. No one knew they wanted it. Now everybody wants it. Here's some of the books we did. I read 4 different cool old paperbacks from basically my childhood. These were books that I bought when I was about 15 or 16, most of them, even younger. And some I read and some I didn't read. The ones I never read before were these. This is a trilogy of books. I don't know what the title of the trilogy is, but it's called The Prince in Waiting by John Christopher. I don't know if any of you read this. It's a young adult book published in 1970. John Christopher wrote a couple of novels I really liked when I was young. One was called No Blade of Grass. I always loved post-apocalyptic novels, and he wrote one of the great ones, No Blade of Grass, when some disease kills all the vegetation in the world and people are trying to survive. And another one called The Long Winter, when kind of the world is covered in ice. Anyway, his stuff is very good, very simply written, and very involving, very absorbing. And he did a bunch of young adult books, which I'd never. One was called The Tripods. I think about the tripods, and I bought all these, and I've had them for ages. And I finally sat down and read. This is the good thing about being old and no one wants you to do anything, except stay out of their way. I'm perfectly happy to do that. Prince in Waiting, and then The Burning Lands, Beyond the Burning Lands, and I forget what the third one's called because I haven't read that yet. Anyway, the first two volumes of the trilogy are a lot of fun. I have to say I started this one, and I pretty much couldn't put it down. I don't know why. I wish I could tell you why. It is about a young adult, so the central character is a teenager, but it's set in this world which you think is kind of a medieval world, but it's actually a science fiction-y, possibly post-apocalyptic. I don't want to spoil it too much for you, but possibly post-apocalyptic world. And there's like magicians running around who are basically trying to manipulate events. And then there's these kind of there's this very, very heavily structured series of rituals between all these villages, these towns who have regular wars with one another to win prizes from each other. And a little bit of, not the Hunger Games, but a little bit of that, because every year they have this big battle where all the young men go out and show how strong they are. And the central character is, as usual, a young man who's not from the best family, but he's smart and hardworking, and he becomes the prince. He becomes the prince, and his father becomes the head prince, or whatever it is. I don't know if I could say much more about it without spoiling a little bit, but there is an idea here that something has happened in the past, and by the time you get all the way through this book, you find out some of what's happened in the past. And that's what the second book, Beyond the Burning Land, so this world of villages is surrounded by these burning hills. And so we have to find out, you have to keep reading to go find out what's going on. And there's this kind of battle between this series of, they call them seers or mages or whatever it is, and these different political entities that work in the villages. Anyway, it's about this young guy going around trying to find out what's going on in the world. And quite simply written, but very involving. And I don't know, I think I enjoyed it as much as I think I would have enjoyed an adult novel. I don't think of young adult novels as being too much different, but I enjoyed those very much. Another one, we wanted to do a special episode saying goodbye to Doris Piserchia. And Doris Piserchia, who we've talked about regularly, and her grandson sometimes touches base with us here at the bathtub, she wrote a lot of wonderful, brilliant, unusual, and wickedly funny, kind of strange science fiction, far future science fiction novels. Really well written. This is called A Billion Days of Earth, 1976. When I hear from her grandson and some of his friends, many of them talk about how this is one of their favorite books. I liked it a lot. It's not my favorite of her books. It's one of her more complicated books. It's almost got a kind of Alice in Wonderland feel to it because it's so many weird ideas going on one after another that it's kind of hard to keep up with all the different characters. But it's this far future landscape again, millions of years in the future, and all these weird creatures live on the earth. And there are human beings. Human beings have evolved into sort of godlike characters. And then I think the rats have turned into human being-like characters. And I can't really tell you more than that because it sounds silly, but it's not. It's beautifully written. I didn't get a chance to do it with Christopher. There's just not enough time. But I'll read the opening page. I think it's a bit of a cheat to read the opening pages, but with her, it's so hard to read and put stuff in context. There's so many beautiful passages. I'll just give you an idea where you are when you start a Piserchia novel. Had it just then been born? The creature didn't know. It crawled up out of the volcanic crater, hung there on the lip and stared about. It saw a small thing hopping in the tumbleweeds at the foot of the mountain. One paragraph, you're an alien creature coming up out of this volcano. Help, it cried. The animal in the tumbleweeds came to a halt with its short, broad ears perked. It was a Terry, and it was a descendant of an animal called a rabbit that had been extinct for 1 billion days. Long-legged, brown-furred, it weighed approximately 25 pounds. It was subnormal in intelligence because it wanted to find sense in this world of 3 million A.D. Who calls? The Terry had sufficient intelligence to speak, but he had never before communicated with anything but another Terry. Who calls? The Terry was puzzled. This isn't Echo Valley, so why do my words come back to me? Me? You're a silly echo wherever you come from. You? I, you, he, we, you, they, said the Terry. I'm here, you're there, we're both somewhere. Are you up in that dead volcano? Who are you? There was a pause then. I am. I want. I am in need. This creature who's just come into existence is just a desire for things. Grinning up at the mountain, the Terry said, Ask and receive, ignorant child. Anyway, I just heard that I think Doris Piserchia died about a year ago. We always want to say goodbye, give her a proper goodbye, but this is just to say goodbye to her now. Wonderful writer. If you ever see any books by her and you like kind of really strange, kind of really interestingly written science fiction, check that out. Finally, the book I probably enjoyed most of the past week or two of these old reminiscences down memory lane of the old paperbacks on my shelves. I read The Year of the Quiet Sun by a guy named Wilson Tucker. I'll bet many people haven't heard of Wilson Tucker, or if they heard, they haven't read him. This is from that great, remember the Ace Science Fiction specials? I bought these every time they came out when I was a kid. Look at that. That's Leo and Diane Dillon's covers. These were beautiful books, and Terry Carr just did brilliant work. Only a few quaaludes, otherwise there's nothing in that except pure mountain water. And I'd read this book when I was a kid, and I really liked it, and I always wanted to read it again for some reason. I couldn't remember it very well. I knew it was a travel through time. Wilson Tucker did a couple of time travel novels. One was called The Lincoln Hunters. I read that a couple times over my life and enjoyed it both times. And he was a writer. He was very active in SF fandom, and he also wrote thrillers. And I've heard his books are uneven, but this is a really beautifully written book. And it's a very odd book for a variety of reasons. It's set in 1960. It was published in 1970. I think it's set a few years after that date. I always thought writers who did that had a few balls. It's like trying to publish something that within 2 years you can find out if you're wrong or not. It's set in early 70s or 80s. And a group of scientists in the military build a time travel machine. And this is it's a world about 10 years from the 70s, which is exactly all the bad problems of the 60s and 70s are still there. The Vietnam War is continuing. The Israel occupation of Palestine is just starting over for another 50 years. All these conflicts and all these problems, and the problems with race riots in the cities, inner cities, and the anger, hostilities between blacks and whites in the cities is getting worse and worse. And it's about 10 years in the future where people are starting to say, well, we're in trouble. And so they build this time machine. And the president, he's not a Trump character, but he's basically a spineless character as he's described. He's off stage, so the whole book wants to find out whether he's going to win the future elections and what's going to happen. So they set up this group of people. One of the guys is the central character is a guy named Cheney, who's a historian, and he basically writes about the far past. And they bring him in, and they bring a bunch of military people, and they have a machine that's supposed to take them progressively a few years in the future for one of the characters, another few years for the next one, another few years for the next guy. And they want to map out the next 20 years, see what's going to happen. And basically, I won't tell you too much about it, but basically, the world gets worse and worse really quickly, especially the racial divide in America. And within a few years, the parts of Chicago have actually the rebellion, which is basically blacks against who are fed up with the way they're treated. They're actually closing off sections of the city and having a war against the whites who live in the suburbs and all the nice areas. It's all a very strange book. It kind of reveals itself as we go through the series of time jumps into the future. And there's some beautiful writing in it. It's some really the sense of this future world, which as the world, there's a war with China that starts to develop, and that leads to a nuclear war. As this world just completely destroys itself, the central character Cheney starts to go into the future, and he starts to find the world to be more peaceful. I think that's basically the part that's most haunting. And there's some really lovely descriptions. I can't really find a perfect passage to read here. And I think I'm just going to read a moment. The first time Cheney the whole book is about the relationships between these people and setting up for these trips into the future. And when Cheney finally makes his trip, things are starting to go wrong. And he ends up in this, again, the same bunker where the time machine has been for 20 years. And he gets out, and this is how he sees things. He's got a gun. He doesn't like to use guns. He moved slowly down the corridor in a black, eerie silence to the shelter. Dust stirred up by his feet made him want to sneeze. The shelter door was found by touch and pushed open, but the overhead lights failed in their automatic response. Cheney felt for the manual switch beside the door, flicked it, but stayed in darkness. The electric power was out, and the lecturing engineer was a liar. The engineer had told him certain things. It didn't turn out to be true. He listened intently to the unseen room. He had no matches or lighter, the penalty paid by a non-smoker when lighter fire was needed, and stood there for a moment of indecision, trying to recall where the smaller items were stored. He thought they were in metal lockers along the far wall, near the racks of heavy clothing. Cheney shuffled across the floor, wishing he had that cocksure engineer with him. So he's trying to remember where everything is because they've left everything for 20 years in this bunker. So when you go into the future, before you come back, you can find your way around. Again, that doesn't really give justice to the book, and particularly how it slowly involves you in the lives of these characters who are going off into the future. There's as a reader, spoiler alert. I'll give you a spoiler alert. I remember when it came out, people criticized the book for this, and I don't know if it works or not. It's interesting though, but Tucker doesn't tell you that Cheney's black. There's when you read it the second time, you realize that there's sort of tips to it, that especially when Cheney is out in Chicago or traveling around in the future, and he's in these white neighborhoods, that people are looking at him strange, and Tucker keeps that held back. He doesn't tell you that until near the end of the book, and at the end of the book, the sadness of it is that that problem has not gone away. That even at the end of the world, that kind of racial antagonism is still there. I like the book a lot. And if you're interested in reading some really old book, 55 years ago, Wilson Tucker wrote a very nice novel that has some beautiful writing. I think particularly the image of the year of the quiet sun, when he goes to the future and the sun is quiet and the world is quiet. It's got some beautiful writing in it. Stay safe. That's the Hodgepodge. You didn't know you wanted it until we gave it to you. Stay safe. And the animals have done very well. Excuse me. Except now I'm belching. The animals did very well today.